Hey there, future tanking legends. Today, we're strapping on our shields and diving deep into the world of Protection Warrior leveling in the War Within.
Oh, yeah.
We'll uncover the secrets to a killer tank rotation, taking you from level 1 newbie to level 80 dungeon dominator. And don't worry, we're not regurgitating guides. We're going to break down the why behind the what,
Right.
so you can truly understand how to become an unyielding force on the battlefield.
What's fascinating about the Protection Warrior is how much their role changes as they level. You're not just gaining new abilities, you're fundamentally shifting your approach to threat, rage, and even DPS.
Okay, so let's start with those baby steps.
Yeah.
Imagine you're a fresh-faced level 1 warrior stepping into your first dungeon.
Uh-huh.
What are the absolute must-knows about tanking at this stage?
At this point, you're learning the delicate dance of threat and rage management. Threat, of course, is all about holding the enemy's attention. You want those baddies focused on you, not your squishy healer friend.
Right.
And rage, well, that's the fuel that powers your abilities.
I've heard the term rage dump thrown around. What exactly does that mean?
A rage dump is an ability you use when you have excess rage, and your main threat-generating abilities are on cooldown. It's better to spend that rage than let it go to waste. Early on, a heroic strike is your primary rage dump.
So which abilities should I be prioritizing in those early dungeons to keep the enemies glued to me?
Two abilities reign supreme in the early levels: Shield Slam and Revenge. Think of Shield Slam as your heavy hitter. It's a powerful attack that scales with your shield block value, meaning the better your shield, the harder it hits.
So as my gear improves, so does my threat generation.
Exactly.
That makes sense. What about Revenge? I remember that one having a pretty satisfying sound effect.
Revenge is a beast early on. It triggers after you successfully block, dodge, or parry an attack. And here's the kicker. It has an incredibly high threat per rage value. You get a ton of bang for your buck, rage-wise.
So using shield block often isn't just about surviving hits. It's also about setting up those devastating revenge attacks.
Right.
I'm starting to see how it all connects.
Exactly. You're thinking like a true tank already. And to make things even spicier, you'll be using Sunder Armor or Devastate early on to apply an armor debuff to your target, making them more vulnerable to your attacks and your group's damage.
All right, so I'm picturing myself in this dungeon, confidently holding aggro on a single baddie. But what happens when I'm facing a whole pack of angry mobs? How do I manage threat when I'm outnumbered?
That's where your AoE abilities come in. Early on, you'll rely heavily on Thunderclap and Demoralizing Shout. Thunderclap hits all enemies in melee range, slowing them down, and generating a good chunk of threat.
And Demoralizing Shout, if I remember correctly, reduces the enemy's attack power.
You got it. It's a fantastic ability for improving your group's survivability, especially when facing large pulls. Think of it as a protective aura you cast over your allies.
So to recap those crucial early levels, we're using Shield Slam and Revenge as our bread and butter threat generators, weaving in shield block to boost our survivability and trigger more revenges, and utilizing Thunderclap and Demoralizing Shout to manage those chaotic AoE situations. Did I miss anything?
You nailed it. Those are the core principles that will carry you through those first 20 levels. But as you gain experience and unlock new abilities, the real fun begins.
Okay, I'm ready to level up. What kind of game changers await us as we progress?
Between levels 21 and 40, your arsenal expands significantly, and your understanding of threat and rage management deepens. One of the most impactful talents you'll unlock is Improved Revenge.
Improved Revenge. Does that mean what I think it means? More revenge.
More and better. Improved Revenge makes your revenge attacks cleave, hitting an additional target. Suddenly you're generating massive threat on multiple enemies with a single ability. It's a complete game changer for AoE tanking.
Okay, I'm definitely liking the sound of this. Cleaving revenges, more enemies glued to me. What else is in store for us in this level range?
Well, Shield Block, which was already a solid defensive tool, becomes even more crucial. Not only does it help you mitigate more damage, but those frequent blocks mean more opportunities to unleash those sweet, sweet cleaving revenges.
So more blocks, more revenges, more threat, more survivability. I'm starting to feel like an unstoppable force.
That's the spirit, and it doesn't stop there. You also gain access to Concussion Blow, a situational stun that can interrupt dangerous enemy casts, or just add a quick burst of threat. Plus, you'll pick up utility abilities like Intercept, Disarm, and Intimidating or Challenging Shout to further control the battlefield.
This is a lot to keep track of. It sounds like tanking really starts to get interesting at this point. But is there anything else in this level bracket that truly transforms the way we approach tanking?
There is one ability that completely revolutionizes AoE tanking.
Shockwave.
Ah, Shockwave, the one that stuns everything in front of you. I've heard stories. It's as impactful as the rumors suggest. Shockwave is a high-damage AoE stun. That generates an incredible amount of threat. It's your go-to for locking down a group of enemies and giving your DPS some breathing room.
Okay, I'm sold. Shockwave sounds like a must-have for any aspiring AoE tank.
And what about Demoralizing Shout? Does that still play a significant role as we level up?
It does, especially if you choose the booming voice talent. This seemingly simple talent transforms Demoralizing Shout from a defensive cooldown into an offensive powerhouse.
Wait, what? How does that work?
Booming voice gives you a burst of rage and increases your damage dealt to affected enemies for a short time after you use Demoralizing Shout. So you're not just debuffing enemies, you're also getting a damage boost to make your attacks hit even harder. It's a fantastic tool for quickly establishing threat on large pools.
So instead of just mitigating damage, we're actually using Demoralizing Shout to amplify our own damage output. I like the way this is going. But before we jump ahead, let's make sure our listeners have a solid grasp of the core rotation at this stage. Excellent point. By level 40, your single target priority should look something like this. Shield Slam whenever it's available, followed by Revenge. Then Devastate to maintain that armor debuff, and potentially reset your Shield Slam cooldown. Thunderclap can be used as filler for the attack speed slow, and Heroic Strike serves as your trusty rage dump when needed.
Okay, that makes sense. So it's all about prioritizing those high threat abilities and making the most of every rage point. What about our AoE rotation at this stage? How are we weaving in those new toys, like Shockwave and Booming Voice?
For AoE, Shockwave takes center stage, followed by Thunderclap on cooldown. Revenge, with its new cleaving ability, is a powerhouse for spreading threat, and that Booming Voice Demoralizing Shout is the perfect opener to establish dominance right out of the gate.
I'm picturing myself in a dungeon, confidently leading the charge. Shockwave stunning enemies left and right. Cleaving Revenges flying everywhere. It's beautiful.
It is quite satisfying, isn't it? And as you continue to level up, the synergy between your abilities and talents becomes even more apparent. You're no longer just using abilities. You're orchestrating a symphony of destruction.
Okay, before we move on to the higher levels and those legendary hero talents, I want to touch on one crucial point you mentioned earlier, the importance of gear. How does our equipment affect our tanking performance?
Gear plays a significant role in your overall effectiveness as a tank. Remember how we talked about Shield Slam scaling with your shield block value? Well, as you acquire better shields with higher block values, your Shield Slams will hit harder, generating more threat. Similarly, upgrading your armor and other gear will improve your survivability, allowing you to withstand more punishment.
So it's not just about learning the rotation, it's also about making sure our gear is up to snuff.
Exactly. A skilled protection warrior knows how to leverage every advantage, from their ability choices to their gear optimization. It's all about maximizing your potential and becoming an unyielding force on the battlefield.
This is all starting to click for me now. But what awaits us in those later levels? Does it get even crazier than cleaving revenges and AoE stuns?
Oh, it definitely gets crazier. Just wait until you get your hands on those hero talents. We'll delve into all that after a quick break. Stay tuned.
All right, we're back and ready to tackle those legendary hero talents you teased before the break. Level 71, it's like unlocking the next evolution of the protection warrior, right?
It absolutely is. At this stage, you get to choose between two distinct paths, Colossus or Mountain Thane, each offering a unique way to amplify your tanking prowess.
So a branching path.
Yeah.
Like choosing your destiny. I love it. Let's start with Colossus.
Okay.
What kind of warrior emerges from that path?
Colossus embodies raw power and resilience, making you an unstoppable force. Its signature ability is Demolish, a channeled attack that unleashes a barrage of blows on your target and anyone within 8 yards.
Hold on. A channeled attack.
Yeah.
But as a tank, do I need to be constantly moving and reacting?
That's the beauty of Demolish. You can still block, parry, and dodge while channeling it, meaning you don't sacrifice defense for this massive damage output.
Okay, that changes things. So how do I incorporate Demolish into my rotation? Do I just spam it whenever it's off cooldown?
Think of Demolish as your opening act for challenging encounters, or those moments where you need to establish threat fast. Facing a tough boss, Demolish. A large pack of mobs, Demolish. It's your go-to for quickly grabbing aggro and holding it tight.
It sounds like my kind of ability. I'm all about making a grand entrance. But what about Mountain Thane? What flavor of awesome does that path offer?
If Colossus is the immovable mountain, Mountain Thane is the raging storm. This path enhances your Thunderclap and related abilities, turning you into a master of AoE threat.
Oh, electrifying. Tell me more about these storm-themed goodies.
One of the key additions is Thunderblast, an active ability that deals a burst of AoE damage and grants you a temporary damage reduction buff.
So I'm dishing out pain and becoming tougher. It's like having your cake and eating it too.
Precisely. You weave Thunderblast into your AoE rotation, using it whenever it's off cooldown to maximize your damage, and enjoy that extra layer of protection. It pairs perfectly with Thunderclap, creating a devastating combo that will keep those enemies reeling.
I'm already picturing myself as a lightning-wielding berserker, controlling the battlefield with thunderous force. But wait, didn't you mention something about actual lightning strikes?
Ah, yes. Mountain Thane also enhances your Thunderclap, Revenge, and even Execute, with a chance to call down lightning strikes on your targets.
No way! So just by doing my regular rotation, I'm triggering these bonus lightning attacks. It's like a free damage lottery.
That's the beauty of it. These lightning procs add even more threat and DPS to your arsenal, making you a true force of nature in AoE situations.
I have to admit, I'm leaning towards Mountain Thane right now. That lightning-infused playstyle sounds incredibly fun. But let's talk about those levels between 61 and 70 before we unlock our hero talents. Is it just a matter of biding our time until we hit that magic level 71?
Not at all. From 61 to 70, you're still a formidable tank. Your core rotation remains potent, especially as you acquire better gear with higher stats.
So it's not like I suddenly become a liability until I hit that hero talent threshold.
Absolutely not. You're still a vital part of the team. And your threat generation should be more than sufficient for most dungeon encounters, especially with talents like Sword and Board, ensuring those shield slams are hitting hard and fast.
You mentioned Sword and Board earlier, but I think a quick refresher would be helpful for those who haven't encountered it yet.
Of course, Sword and Board is a passive talent that can dramatically increase your threat output. It gives your Devastate attacks, or your auto attacks if you're using the Devastator talent, a chance to reset the cooldown on Shield Slam. This means you can potentially chain Shield Slams together, generating a massive amount of threat in a short amount of time.
So Devastate becomes less about dealing direct damage and more about setting up those Shield Slam nukes.
That's brilliant. Exactly. It highlights a key principle of tanking. Maximizing your damage output directly translates to higher threat generation.
So it's not just about taking hits, it's about dishing out the pain as well. I'm liking this more and more.
That's the warrior spirit. And speaking of damage, you also gain access to Execute around this level range.
Execute. But that's a finishing move, isn't it? I thought that was reserved for DPS classes.
Well, it's true that Execute is most effective as a finishing blow. When an enemy is low on health, it can also be a useful tool for protection warriors in certain situations.
Interesting. So how do we integrate Execute into our tanking rotation?
It's important to remember that Shield Slam and Revenge remain your primary threat generators, so you don't want to spam Execute at the expense of those abilities. However, if you're following the Mountain Thane path, you might find yourself using Execute more often to capitalize on those bonus lightning strikes that proc from it. Ah, right. Those lightning procs from Mountain Thane also affect Execute. It all comes full circle. So it's more about adapting your rotation to the specific situation and making the most of every opportunity.
Exactly. Tanking is all about being adaptable and making strategic decisions on the fly.
This is all making so much sense now. I'm starting to see how the Protection Warrior rotation evolves and becomes more intricate as we level up. But let's break down those level 71 to 80 rotations in more detail. First up, single target with the Colossus talents. What does our endgame rotation look like with Demolish in the mix?
Imagine you're facing down a fearsome raid boss, ready to prove your worth as the unyielding shield. With the Colossus talents, your single target priority remains largely the same, but with the added power of Demolish.
So Shield Slam is still our king.
Absolutely, Shield Slam, especially when boosted by those Sword and Board procs, is the cornerstone of your single target threat generation. Revenge is a close second, always ready to deliver a punishing blow when it's available.
And Demolish comes in to amplify our damage output. Precisely. You want to use Demolish on cooldown, unleashing that flurry of attacks to dominate the threat meter. And remember, even though it's channeled, you can still defend yourself. So don't hesitate to unleash its full fury.
Got it. Demolish on cooldown, Shield Slam and Revenge whenever possible. What about Devastate? Does it still have a role to play in this endgame rotation?
Devastate is still essential for maintaining those Sunder armor stacks, and more importantly, fishing for those glorious Shield Slam resets. It's the glue that holds the rotation together, ensuring a constant flow of threat.
And Heroic Strike, our trusty rage dump, is still there for those moments when we need to spend some excess rage.
Exactly. Heroic Strike prevents rage capping and provides a bit of extra damage when your other abilities are on cooldown.
Okay, that covers single target with Colossus. What about AoE with Mountain Thane? How do we become that storm of righteous fury we talked about earlier? Paint me a picture.
Picture a swirling vortex of lightning and thunder. Enemies stunned and disoriented, as you command their attention with an iron grip. Your AoE opener remains the same, Shockwave for the stun and massive threat generation, followed by Thunderclap on cooldown to keep those enemies slowed and under control.
So far, so good. But how does Thunder Blast fit into this chaotic dance?
Thunderblast is your new best friend. You'll want to weave it into your rotation whenever it's available, pairing it with Thunderclap for a devastating 1-2 punch that will melt through enemy health bars.
Thunderclap, Thunder Blast. It's a symphony of destruction. And those lightning procs from Mountain Thane are adding fuel to the fire, right?
They are. Every Thunderclap, Revenge, and even Execute has a chance to trigger those bonus lightning strikes, creating a dazzling display of power that will make those DPS green with envy.
Okay, this is officially the coolest tanking spec I've ever heard of. I'm sold on Mountain Thane. But before we get too carried away, let's not forget about Revenge. Does it still have a place in our AoE rotation, even with all these new abilities?
Revenge is a classic for a reason. That cleaving effect is still incredibly valuable in AoE situations, ensuring you're spreading the threat around and keeping all those enemies focused on you.
Right. Revenge is the gift that keeps on giving. What about Demoralizing Shout? Are we still using that for the damage boost?
Absolutely. Even with all the fancy new abilities from your hero talents, Booming Voice Demoralizing Shout remains a powerful tool for increasing your damage output and making those packs melt even faster.
So to recap our Mountain Thane AoE rotation, it's Shockwave into Thunderclap and Thunderblast on cooldown. Sprinkle in some Revenge. And don't forget about that Booming Voice Demoralizing Shout for an extra kick. Did I get it all?
You got it. And remember, adaptability is key. You can always adjust your rotation based on the specific situation. If there's a particularly dangerous enemy in the pack, you might want to focus some single target abilities on them while using your AoE to control the rest.
Right. It's not just about blindly following a script. It's about understanding the principles behind the rotation and applying them intelligently.
Precisely. A skilled tank is like a conductor, orchestrating the flow of battle and ensuring a harmonious outcome.
I love that analogy. It really captures the essence of what it means to be a protection warrior. But before we move on to our concluding thoughts, I want to touch on those other hero talents, the ones that provide passive buffs rather than new abilities. What kind of impact do those have on our rotations?
Those passive talents are all about enhancing your existing strengths. For example, Colossus talents might grant you increased damage reduction or boost your maximum health, making you even tougher to take down. Mountain Thane talents often focus on physical damage reduction and stamina, improving your resilience against melee attacks.
So they're not changing the buttons I'm pressing, but they're making me more effective overall.
Exactly. Those passive buffs give you the confidence to be more aggressive, knowing you can withstand more punishment, and keep those enemies focused on you.
This is all so fascinating. It really highlights the depth and complexity of the protection warrior. How it's not just about standing there and taking hits, but actively shaping the flow of battle. But I think it's time we wrap up this part of our deep dive and move on to some final thoughts and insights, ready to head to part 3.
Absolutely. Let's go.
Welcome back, warriors. We've journeyed through the leveling process, exploring the intricacies of the Protection Warrior's toolkit,
Right.
from those early dungeons
Right.
to the epic power of hero talents.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
We're in a wild ride.
But before we unleash you on the dungeons of Azeroth, I want to circle back to a crucial point that resonated with me: the importance of efficiency.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Throughout our discussion, we've emphasized how vital it is to make every rage point count, prioritizing abilities like Revenge and Shield Slam, recognizing the value of sword and board procs, and understanding when to use Heroic Strike as a rage dump. It all boils down to resource management.
It's not just about hitting buttons. It's about hitting the right buttons at the right time.
Exactly, and that's where experience comes in. The more you play as a protection warrior, the more intuitive these rotations become.
Right.
You anticipate procs, react instinctively to attacks, and adapt to any situation thrown your way.
So it's a continuous evolution, always learning, always refining those skills.
Precisely. And that's what makes tanking so engaging. It's a demanding role that requires your full attention. but the rewards are immense. When you lead your group through a challenging dungeon, controlling the battlefield and keeping everyone safe, it's an incredibly satisfying feeling.
You mentioned something earlier that really stuck with me.
Oh, yeah.
You compared a skilled tank to a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of destruction. I love that image.
It's quite fitting, isn't it? The tank sets the pace, guides the flow of combat, and ensures all the pieces work together harmoniously.
Speaking of harmony, one thing that's been fascinating to see is how the Protection Warrior has evolved over time, with new abilities and talents shaping their approach to tanking.
Indeed. The introduction of hero talents in the War Within added a whole new layer of depth to their toolkit.
It makes me wonder, how might future expansions further change the Protection Warrior landscape? What new abilities or talents could shake up those rotations we discussed?
That's a great question to ponder. It's exciting to imagine the possibilities. Perhaps we'll see new mechanics that emphasize active mitigation, giving Protection Warriors even more tools to counter specific enemy attacks. Or maybe we'll see a shift in their rage generation mechanics, leading to entirely new rotational priorities.
It's incredible to think that there's still so much potential for growth and evolution within the Protection Warrior class.
Absolutely. And that's part of what makes World of Warcraft so captivating. It's a world of constant change and adaptation, with new challenges and opportunities always on the horizon.
And for those who embrace the role of the Protection Warrior, the adventure never ends. There will always be new dungeons to conquer, new enemies to face, and new ways to refine your skills and become an even more formidable force on the battlefield.
Well said. I think that's a perfect note to end on.
I agree. A huge thank you to our expert for sharing their insights and passion for the Protection Warrior. And to our listeners, we hope this deep dive has equipped you with the knowledge and inspiration to become true masters of the shield. Keep those axes sharp, those shields strong, and remember, the only thing more satisfying than taking a hit is giving one back twice as hard. Until next time, happy tanking.